All right, so we are on part 2 and the back of your quiz or your formative. So we're looking at number 11. The directions say to order the numbers from least to greatest using commas. So before we can do that, we do need to convert some things here. So we're going to start with converting this fraction 3/4. We actually just did that on the end of the first video. I'll show you again really quickly. Top dog in the house, so our 3 goes in the house, our 4 stays on the outside. I'm going to go ahead and put all my work down, but like I said, we did just solve this in the problem before. Okay, so when you work out the problem, you get 75 hundredths. So now let's go back and look at what's around it. So we had a negative absolute value of 75 hundredths. So remember, absolute value is a number's distance from 0. So 75 hundredths is just 75 hundredths from 0, but since that negative's on the outside of the absolute value sign, we're going to take the opposite of that, which is negative 75 hundredths. Okay, so now we are going to convert this guy here, our 7/8. I'm going to use a different color. So top dog in the house, we're going to put the 7 in the house, and our 8 stays on the outside. Okay, so 8 can't go into 7, but it can go into 70 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. Subtracting, you get 6. Drop a 0. 8 can go into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtracting, you get 4. Add a 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. And we're done. So make sure you bring up that decimal. So we have a, remember the original problem was negative 875 thousandths. Okay, and my last number here, we don't need to do any converting or anything, but we have a negative 8/10, but it's repeating. So it goes on forever and ever with just a bunch of 8s after it. So I'm going to go ahead and stack all of our answers on top of each other that we have. So we've got that one, we've got the, oops. Okay, we've got our 75 hundredths, and then, all right, so remember to have the same amount of zeros behind the decimal place. So we need to add a 0 here. And then for the 8 repeating, remember all the digits that you need to add all have to be 8s. Let me make that look a little bit better. Okay, that looks a little better. So remember, these are all negatives. So when you're looking at negatives to compare them, the one that looks bigger actually has a smaller value. So when we're ordering them, we're going to look and see which one actually looks the biggest. Well, this one looks the biggest, but it actually has the smallest value. So that's the number that we're going to write first because they want us to go from least to greatest. Now, when we write it, we need to make sure that we put it in the original format. So it was our 8/10 with the absolute value sign above it. Make sure you add your comma. The next number that we are going to put is going to be this one. But again, make sure you write it in the original format, and that would be our 7/8, our negative 7/8, comma. And then the last one, and the one that with the greatest value, it's going to be the one that's in the middle, and this is how it was written, negative absolute value of 3/4. So the negative absolute value of 3/4. Okay, and that is number 11. That's how you order them from least to greatest. Okay, for this one, we are going to be using the same directions that we used for number 11, which is to order them from least to greatest using the commas. So let's take a look at what we have. The first one is the absolute value of negative 1 2/10. Well, the absolute value of negative 1 2/10 is just going to be 1 2/10. The next one we have here is the negative absolute value of negative 1 200. So what does that actually equal? Well, the absolute value of negative 1 200 would be 1 200, but we got to take the opposite of that because we've got that negative on the outside. So negative 1 200. Okay, the next number that we have is this one right here, which is negative 10 and 2/10, which we don't have to change anything about that. We've just got a negative 10 and 2/10. And then the last one is just 1 and 22/100, which we also don't have to change, 1 and 22/100. Okay, so now we're going to be comparing them and putting them in order from least to greatest. I'm going to rewrite it so they're stacked a little bit nicer. Okay, so make sure that when we're comparing them, we have the same amount of numbers behind the decimal place. So I'm going to add a 0 here and here. So they all have 2 numbers behind the decimal place. Okay, so we are going to order them from least to greatest. Again, so first, we know that our negatives are definitely going to be our smaller numbers, right? They're going to be smaller than our positives. So when we look at just these two, remember the one that looks bigger actually has a smaller value. So that is going to be our negative 10 and 2/10. So that's going to be the first number that we write because that's our smallest. The original version is right here. So negative 10 and 2/10. Okay, so our next one would be the other negative that we have. This is the original way to write it. So the negative absolute value of negative 1. Okay. Now we're looking at our 2 positives that we have left over, which is this guy here, and then we have our 1 and 2/10. So the one that would be the smaller out of the 2 would be this one, which the original version is here. So the absolute value of negative 1 and 2/10. And then our last final one that we would write is this guy here, which is our 1 and 22/100. I know that's not written very well. Let me rewrite it. All right, so that should be it for number 12. All right, for this one, number 13, it says which of the rational numbers below could represent the point on the number line. So I'm just going to start looking at letter A, which is 1 and 7/10. Well, 1 and 7/10 is going to be between 1 and 2, and that would be somewhere in this area here. And that is not where the dot is placed. So it's not going to be A. For B, it says negative 1 and 8/10. So negative 1 and 8/10 is going to be between negative 1 and negative 2, which is exactly where our dot is placed. So I'm going to go ahead and circle B because that one does work. Let's keep going though. For C, we've got negative 2 and 3/10. Negative 2 and 3/10 is going to be between negative 3 and negative 2, which is somewhere in here. That is not where our point is. So it is not going to be C. And then finally, D says, excuse me, negative 5/10. Negative 5/10 would be between 0 and negative 1, so somewhere in here, and that is also not where our point is. So it's also not going to be D. So the correct answer is B for this one. Okay, so for this next part, we are going to write integers to represent each situation. So for number 14, it says 13 feet below sea level. That word below means negative. It's going to be below 0. So negative 13 is the answer for the number 14. For 15, it says a gain of 5 points. That means he earned 5 points. So that's going to be a positive 5. For number 16, it says a temperature of 6 degrees above 0, so that's positive 6. And then the bottom one, this 17, we're actually not even going to count this one because the question was not great. So all of you guys actually got points for this, whether you put 100 or negative 100. The reason being it asks for an integer, which means it's okay to use negatives, but then it asks for the depth. So it's confusing. Everyone got points for this problem. Whether you put 100 or negative 100. Okay, for number 18, it says Alex and John went hiking. Alex's elevation is negative 14. John is lower than Alex. Which could be John's elevation? Circle the correct answer. So it says you may want to draw a number line. So for this, if you're talking about elevation, if somebody's negative 14 feet, Somebody that's going to be lower than them is going to have a more negative number. For this one, the correct answer would be A, negative 20 feet. Because the other ones, the rest of these numbers are all numbers that are actually larger than negative 14, so they would have a higher elevation than Alex. Okay, for number 19, it says the table shows the changes in weights of 3 dogs. Which dog lost the most weight? So when you're looking at this, you're going to think of which one had the most change. So you can think of it like take the absolute value of all of these. Okay, so for the first one, the absolute value of 1 2/10 is just 1 2/10. That's how much it changed. Jenny's would be a 1 21/100, and Daisy would be a 1 25/100. So who had the greatest amount of change? That would be Daisy, because she lost 1 25/100 of a pound. So Daisy should have been the correct answer for number 19. And the last one, which inequality statement represents the change in weight for Lance and Jenny? So remember, when we're talking about change in weight, you're going to take the absolute value of those numbers. So you're going to look for an answer that has absolute value in it. So we can go ahead and eliminate A and C and take a look at these two here that have the absolute value bars in them. So the two people that we're looking at are, the problem says Lance and Jenny. So Lance is here and Jenny's right below him. So Lance's weight was the absolute value of 1 2/10, and Jenny's weight is the absolute value of negative 1 21/100. And if you were to compare those, which one would be greater? Well, this is 1 2/10, and this is 1 21/100 if you take the absolute value of both of them. And then I would add a 0 here to compare them. And that would show me that this one is actually larger than the other one. So the 1 21/100 is larger than the 1 2/10. So the only answer that matches that is B. It's got the correct sign and it's got both of the absolute value symbols. So B is the correct answer for number 20. Hope this helped. Let us know if you have any questions. And yeah, thank you.